is also keeping everyone awake, so we are trying to address that, so it won't be quite so much of an icebox. Well, thank you all so much for sticking with us. I feel like every one of these discussions has already generated so many kind of calls to action and really thought-provoking points, and I'm hoping that this panel, which I believe will also continue along that trend. It's my great pleasure to be the moderator for this panel. We've been talking about sort of shifting winds and things colliding and where we are. I think now we're moving into a phase where we want to talk about how we prepare for the future. So if we want to do what Gina has told us to do, which is to forget about the journalists and prepare for whatever's coming next, I think this is one of the conversations that we want to have. And with me, I'd like to start actually before we talk about the new models, to invite Natalia Viana from Agência Pública in Brazil to talk about her investigation that she did in partnership with many global partners about sort of like a quick look back at the recent past and what can we learn about how big tech has operated as a way to inform us into preparing for what's coming next. Natalia, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for being here. I saw the first conversation start in Brazil. It's beautiful what's been happening all over the world. And so when we started having these conversations, I thought, what can I do as a journalist? And this is one of the things that I'm going to be talking about tomorrow as well in the pre-conference. What journalism does, what is the value of journalism? We create knowledge, that's what we do. So we set out to investigate big tech lobby. We decided to put together transnational collaboration, and Agência Pública did this together with Clippy and another 16 media from all over the world, from South Africa, from Indonesia, from Brazil, from the US, from Europe, and etc. Clippy is the Centro Latino-Americano de Periodismo de Investigación, and we wanted to look into big tech lobby tactics because this is the main invisible force that has been actually kind of stopping regulation. As Barku said, it's not a new thing, it's not a Trump thing, has been here for a while. So for nine months, we investigated big tech lobby tactics in 13 countries, and we published the report. There is a QR code somewhere where you can see the reports called Big Tech's Invisible Hands. And we're all investigative journalists. When we went to look into the lobby tactics, we found out that they are done not only through lobbyists, but by also co-opting media, by forging relationships, by divide and conquer tactics. And these were very essential to stop regulation, but also to stop the debate. Why are we not debating these issues in our countries? More importantly, they use their economic power and the power imbalance in the relationship with the publishers. And something that we found out is that the sacred division between the products team and the policy team is not really that sacred. If needed, they will use their products to put more pressure on the publishers. And if we're talking about the value of news, or if news has any value or not, there's one company that has been working harder than any other to say that news has any value at all, and this one is Google. And Google has been doing this also using its tools and its tactics to co-opt the media. One of the things that we really dug into in our investigation is the showcase deals. Showcase deals are deals that Google have been offering since conversations about bargaining code started spreading all over the world. And what they do is they offer selected media that they choose a deal that is set. The values are not known because everybody have to sign an NDA. And then the publishers have to put out 6 panels with news of the day. Basically, that's it. It is a non-product. They pretend it's a product, but internal people from Google told us it's not really a product. It's just a way to give media the money. But more than 2,000 media around the globe have signed these deals, and they're extremely problematic because they also show what this big tech does when it needs to stop these kinds of conversations. If you try and find it, it's very hard. It's like a tab within a tab within another tab. Nobody has seen it. Nobody, it drives no traffic. There's not one person working in it as a product. The contracts are under NDAs. We know that they range between 25,000 to 250,000. Of course, the biggest deals go to the larger outlets. Within Google, one of the people we interview calls it renting your enemy. It is definitely a way to stop media from partnering up and, politically pushing for regulation. The values also, because they're under NDAs, they vary widely depending on criteria that Google says they have, but they bend as much as they need. So in Brazil, for instance, I found that one media is allowed to post stories that are 3 years old, while others are not, just because Google wanted to have them in their payroll. We've seen that these NDAs have prevented association, so people who are under the same association cannot tell each other how much they're earning. It also creates dependency. They're not auditable, a complete lack of transparency. Secrecy is their main lobby tactic. And the worst thing that we found out is that the contract itself has baked in some clauses that are very worrisome. So one of the clauses, we got some of the contracts, one of the clauses says that traffic from Google search is sufficient remuneration for Google's indexation, display, and other similar uses of content, even though the contract has nothing to do with Google search. Other clauses in the contract state that Google could terminate the deal if a law was passed to establish payment from the platforms, or if the publishers participate in any legal claim against Google. Finally, and another thing, so these clauses were investigated in Germany and they were scraped, but they're still used in Global South countries. And finally, all the showcase contracts obtained by the investigation include an intellectual property section that allows Google to use the publication content in connection with Google products, so they can be used in court to train, if some media challenges them about developing AI tools, they can say, we have these contracts, and these contracts allow us to use the content for AI training. So basically what I think is that we have faced in the past couple of years what Julie Possetti from ICIJ calls platform capture. Now with AI, we're seeing what she calls platform capture 2.0. And this is why we don't have information. This is why it's very hard to find media that will investigate big tech. When we set out to do this investigation, we got lots of no's. And the ones that were more frank said, because we depend on them. But also, it's very hard to find media that will join class actions or will, join these kinds of conversations or litigation against them. So commercial contracts, tools, deals, funding of journalism events, building relationships, many of these are designed having in mind the wider economic strategy, which is to prevent that there is no AI without journalism, not information, journalism. Not only for data mined in the past, but for content mined in the future. And I think, so the provocation that I have is how do we not fall into the same trap? Like, how do we move forward, having these most powerful companies that have literally, infiltrated our media and that made us all dependent on them?
Thank you so much, Natalia. I think that's a perfect way for us. And your question basically was my question. And so I think here we have two amazing panelists. We have Claire Lim, who is from Cloudflare, and we have EM Lewis-Jong from Mozilla Data Collective. On the agenda, you will see that we did have one other panelist, Matt Pruitt, who is from Radical Exchange. He, unfortunately, due to illness, was not able to travel so far to KL. But just a quick plug, he did actually present at Ctrl+J APAC, and so there's a video of his presentation as well. So if you're interested in the third kind of model that we were gonna have on stage here, please do look at that one. But turning to our panelists on stage, actually I'd love to start with you, EM, if you don't mind. We gave each of them a bit of homework ahead of time to prepare for this and asked them to capture on one slide kind of the vision for what the information ecosystem and the kind of the pipe from creators to the end user they wanted to see. So Ian, would you like to start? And if we could put hers on stage first.
This is the bit where my homework is not available. I'm having this panic moment, like going back to school and you realize you've left it on the kitchen table, like, oh. Okay, great. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Lewis-Jong. So we at Mozilla have been working on multilingual data since about 2017, and it's worth saying that it predates ChatGPT, right? Like when we started doing this work, what we meant by AI was completely different. We were working on speech recognition for transcription services, and all of the data that we were creating with communities was dedicated to the public domain. And that concept of the public domain was really, really important because for the now, I think, 308 language communities that we work with, of whom the vast majority are from the global majority, their primary motivation was getting their language on the map and making sure that there were tools and services that actually supported their language. So what has been really difficult over the last couple of years is that people's relationship with CC0 and with the public domain has really shifted. What was initially a kind of a primary motivator for people started to become a lot more loaded, and lots of our communities started saying, you know, I put into open source and open data because I thought it might build a more equitable ecosystem, and I'm starting to worry that it might be having the opposite effect. And so we as Mozilla, as kind of long-term, like open champions, 15 years, we've had to really sit with this. Like, what does openness mean if it doesn't mean that? So, per slide, when I am not at my laptop, I do lots of gardening, in part because I spend way too much time in front of my laptop, like everyone who works in tech. And we have this concept of companion planting, which is basically where when you are growing a crop and it is being invaded by any number of wildlife situations, there are multiple things you can do, right? You can cover it with netting, you can put on cages, you can throw down pellets, or you can plant more and you can plant differently so that instead of things attacking your crops, they go for other things. And I've become really interested in that as a model for thinking about AI training data more broadly. How do we enable abundance so that the internet is not a battleground? Like, if you think about it as, is the internet the best source of training data? Probably no. Of the 7,000 languages in the world, we're only talking about a handful that are really well represented on the internet. And if you think about the tactics used to extract the data, expensive, costly, bad for the planet. And then on top of that, if you think about the fact that for lots of these data sets, they require a ton of work, very expensive work to make it worthwhile. So the internet has become this, like, it's become this battleground because it's the only battery that's available to power the technology. What if it weren't? And so then we became really interested in what would it take to actually unlock people sharing other sources of data. And as of today, estimates have it that less than 1% of the data sets in the world are actually on the internet. So less than 1%. That's what we're using so far. That's what we're, if you like, squabbling over, is 1% of data that was never great and is getting worse thanks to AI slop proliferation. And so we kind of landed on two things in conversation with our community, but that I feel like in this room I'm hearing echoed again, which is enabling fair value exchange. How do we make it possible for us to actually set what benefit looks like for us, which can mean money, but also cannot. Could mean we're really happy to share our data if you're going to be happy to share the tools back with us. Or we're really happy to share the data if we're going to get data back in exchange for this project that we're working on. So it was broadening this frame from compensation to kind of fair value. And then the other big thing has been data agency. Right now, the options are basically put it on the web and relinquish all control, or hold it proprietary to yourself, and then we don't get to engage in an innovation ecosystem that we all want. And so trying to expand that frame of data agency so that we could talk more about sharing in line with your values so that you can share by domain, or you can share by geography, or you can share by profit model. So that's really been the conversation at Mozilla so far.
Thanks, Ian. Just to clarify, when you're talking about the data collective, you're focused on training data as opposed to RAG. Is that right? For now. For now. Great. And hold your questions. I'm sure you will have many questions in the audience. But next, I'd like to turn to Claire from Cloudflare, who will present her homework, and then also we can move into questions.
I cheated a little bit. I have 2 slides instead of 1. Yeah. But I thought it was important to kind of illustrate the technology side of things, right? Like how we're seeing things change not just from a theoretical or political point of view, but also from the technology perspective, so that we can appreciate what kind of controls are needed for the future. So where we're seeing is that in the past, we rely a lot on this traffic for content approach, this exchange, whereby users will actually go to your search engines and then search for the information, and in return, you would receive that referred traffic to your site. And this is a mutually beneficial model because media and publications will then also fuel the searches with quality content while getting the referred users to their site, which improves or things that they can monetize. Today, we're seeing this go out of control with users actually turning to Gen AI tools and asking them questions instead of going to your search engines. The AI summarization on platforms, including Google, Meta, these are also removing the traffic from your site. And of course, with the rise of agentic AI, this is getting more and more serious, right, in the future. So all these different platforms, they're powered by very, very powerful machine learning like models. And all these models, they are powered in turn by agents or crawlers that the companies are using. So these crawlers are designed to be very knowledge hungry. They don't just crawl your site once or twice a day. They crawl your site very, very aggressively, crawling all the pages. And that in turn is creating a huge strain for media and publications companies, right? You have an increase in cost where you have to support the infrastructure. And at the same time, the user never reaches your site anymore. So you don't have the incentive to continue creating quality content. And that's really, really important because quality content is what makes the internet so powerful, right? And this is not only a problem for your media and publishers, it's also a problem for the AI companies. In the long run, without your quality content, you have nothing to fuel the searches, and you rely on synthetic content or outdated content to be able to provide information to your users. So we are promoting what we call like a AI-first model, one that is creating a permission-based approach instead of allowing something that's hugely based on extraction. And to illustrate as well, like what we think the future looks like. So there are 2 key themes here. First is we want to re-establish control and then to build towards a new economy. So by inserting, we found an opportunity to insert a layer of control between the AI crawlers and the media or publishers' content. And by inserting this layer of control, you want to do a few things. First, you want to get the visibility. What kind of crawlers are accessing my content? Why are they doing it? What's the content being used for? And that's really important because it lays the foundation of like what are the controls I want to put in place. Are they crawling my site at really crazy rates, or it's somewhat manageable and I still want to allow people to use this method to access my content and reach my site. We also see there are a lot of misbehaving bots or misbehaving AI companies who claim that their bots are performing or doing research in this manner, but it's actually doing something else. They bypass certain controls. So we want to provide something that's accurate and is consistent with all of the sets a framework or standard for everyone. And so Cloudflare has been really big in terms of lobbying for better cryptographically signed kind of agents and crawlers so that we make it really accurate signal for you to regain control. And then from there, you want to manage your access. So this is where the permission-based approach comes in. Whether you want to allow bots to reach your site, or whether you want to limit their access, whether you want to block outright, I think we see a lot of a huge variety of asks from customers. And to be able to provide the sticks and tools for them to enforce whatever logic they want to do, that is our role in this game. And for those crawlers that you want to allow, right, there comes the third point of being able to create a new business model where you can effectively charge the new audience that you have, which is your AI crawlers, and receive fair compensation for the kind of content that you've spent a lot of energy and effort creating. And last but not least, innovate, right? I think we all acknowledge that user behaviors change, the way that we look for data has changed, and we are all benefiting from this new behavior. It's a lot more efficient and it's a lot more intimate in a lot of ways. So what we can do to actually empower the media and publishing committee to adapt to these changes, right? We're not everyone is able to train their own model or to build their own interface without the right skill set or teams to do so. And that's why we really started to publish a lot of new content around like how to simplify these kind of approaches. So one example that I wanted to share was the recent announcement that we made on NL Web and our AI search function. We combine these two to really make it easy to bring users to your site and have users interact with an AI search assistant that only references content from your site. So that's how you keep them on your site while still, adapting to their changing user behavior and expectations to make it easier for them and more seamless. So yeah, I think that's where we see the path is going forward, where we want to take back control, build a new permission-based economy and approach, and innovate for the next audience, your crawlers and also your users who have now changed in terms of their expectations and behavior.
Thank you, Claire. So if I can just do a tiny bit of synthesis, drawing from the panels that came before and also what we just heard, I think that it sounds like, this is a multi-front battle, right? So, and there's defense and there's offense that we have to take. I think, Natalia, your investigation really showed that while many media organizations are in the here and now, trying to stay alive and taking money because they need it, they may be signing in the same way that smaller countries in signing trade deals, they may be giving up more than they actually realize. And one thing I thought that was quite interesting was the provision in many of these Google Showcase deals that describes the fact that we can cancel the Showcase deal if you advocate, if the law is passed in your country, if you enter into a lawsuit. That it does silence, and prevent sort of those mechanisms to try to change the ecosystem for the future by trading away, being able to get funding for right now because you're trying to make payroll. I think this is particularly acute for many of the newsrooms in the Global South. And certainly the overarching rules of the game, when you compare Europe to a Brazil in terms of having that provision in the contract, is really important. And so the more transparency around that, I think, is really, really valuable to know. To me, another thing that I'd love for us to kind of explore further is the tension between open information and wanting to make sure that everyone has access to high quality information, that LLMs represent culture and language, but the fact that, bills need to be paid, and a lot of this work does cost human resources, financial resources, and for journalism, legal, physical safety, digital safety, there are so many different considerations at work. And so I'd love to hear, and then the last theme that I'd like to kind of address is the fact that there is, on the one hand, what's happening on the internet, and to me, the point that you made, EM, about 1% being on the web versus all this other information that is in databases, on computers, our archives and articles and interview transcripts and whatnot, and how to make sure that there is additional, that there's more control. And so, represented on the stage, you represent two different interventions that are tackling different parts of this. There are many, many, many others. There are many other startups. There are other companies that are getting into this. I think Microsoft even made an announcement that they were going to be helping publishers to be able to, collect, fees for content. How should, from either a technical, strategic, or even a regulatory point of view, should members of this audience grapple with the many players that are out there and the fact that we really don't know who's going to come out on top or what that model is going to be? Like, how should we? I mean, I'd love to just hear everyone weigh in on, like, how do you even approach this? How do you tackle this?
I'll go first, you go second. Well, firstly, I really want to stress that I think they are not mutually exclusive interventions. In fact, I have a feeling that we need all of them at the moment. Like, this is in the same way that software has a stack, like these interventions, there is a stack of interventions that we need. We need the regulation, we need the technical infrastructure, we need the community mobilization, we need the transparency and accountability investigations that give it teeth. So I think we need all of those. I think my steer, maybe a biased steer, judge for yourself, is that the things that people should be investing their time and energy in now are things that don't require you to make the choice. So what I mean by that is, I think that my hot take is that signing exclusive licensing deal is kind of the enemy right now, and really what we want to be doing is creating ecosystems where your content belongs to you, and we are helping you to get it into the hands of as many people as possible, and what you charge them may be very dependent on who they are and what you value and the interaction you want to have with them. So what we do with Mozilla Data Collective, which, as I say, is not focused on content that's on the web, it's focused on content that is not on the web. What we do is we allow you to upload your content. You can decide how you want it to be shared. You can decide whether you want compensation for it. Those features are going live soon, where you'll be able to say, if you're this kind of company, we expect this kind of contribution. If you are a local researcher and this is part of an accountability investigation, you can have it for free. Because when we were speaking to people, we found that's what they actually wanted. They didn't want one size fits all, and they didn't want to have to choose one actor. They really wanted choice. So if you put your data on Mozilla Data Collective, it doesn't stop you owning it, and it doesn't stop you sharing it elsewhere. But it is more effective if you actually make a structured decision about how you want to share and with who. Because I think these blunt interventions, I think are problematic and likely to have consequences in the long term. And just a very quick note, because sometimes people say, but I don't have any data that's not on the internet. You do. You have so much data that's not on the internet. Just to give you a kind of worked example, we did a little video for Mozilla Data Collective the other day. I was in it, 5 or 6 of our community members from all over the world were in it. We were on the phone and on Zoom with the comms team for an hour each. I believe the video was 3 minutes long. I can tell you exactly what will happen to the rest of that footage. It will fester in my Google Drive until I leave Mozilla and then be deleted. It is a high-quality multimodal data set, multicultural and multilingual. It is worth a lot of money, properly structured and properly made available. All of you are sitting on data like that, and I think one of the things that I worry about is that there's sort of a little bit, look over here, but the over here is maybe not the most interesting here to be discussing. People have lots and lots of data sets that could contribute to better, more inclusive, more representative AI. And I think if we can get the incentives and motivations and safeguards right to share it, then we'll be able to build something that both speaks to sustainability and speaks to innovation.
Yep. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think there's a lot of good points that we definitely do see also in conversations that we're having as well. The first thing was there's no one size fits all, and maybe probably also because we're more at the infrastructure level, we don't just see monetization requests, right? There's a lot of discussion around like, how can I limit control? Are other companies limiting control? Do they do a default block? Can I block them on just some pages? Can I just control them from not accessing my content during the time that I want to serve regular users, like human users? so the user experience doesn't get degraded. And I think that's where we really need to look at the flexibility of the platform. What kind of options do you have, right? Rather than just being a straightforward, like, just compensation. And of course, for different types of organizations trying to access my content for different purposes, then I also want the flexibility to do it differently. Another great point you mentioned is the individual negotiating of contracts that's just not scalable. We see companies or media companies like speaking to us and saying that they've negotiated a contract with, say, OpenAI. What happens when tomorrow a new AI company comes in? In February, we saw like a huge influx of traffic from DeepSeek, right? And when things like this happen, are you going to go ahead and sign a new contract, again, renegotiate everything? By the time that's ready, that's months later, and you've been, suffering the increase in infrastructure costs coming from these traffic sources. So it's not a sustainable model. And of course, the last thing is operational ease, the visibility that you're getting. Ideally, the controls and the visibility should be on the same platform so that you can actually see the impact of enforcing all these additional layers of whether it's security or guardrails, right, that you want to put in to safeguard your content. And if that happens on different platforms, it's a very disjointed experience. There's a lot of manual correlation of data, and there's just, it's difficult to prove value that way. So I think these are some of the key things that we also discuss with our customers, and we try to create that platform based on the feedback that we're getting. And of course, this space is changing every day, so we're also keeping up with the conversations and powering innovation in that space as well.
No, I just wanted to comment something because you said there's a big stack of things that need to be put together. One of the things that I wanted to say, and Paula brought this in her intervention earlier on, this battle is being fought on the narrative side as well. And I think, and again, not only journalists, but researchers are really behind in terms of researching who are the people who are making the decisions within big tech and how they are shaping our world. And it's just a handful of people. It's really just a handful of people. It's a group of people that is not too hard to investigate because it has never been so concentrated. So one of the stacks is we need to create information and knowledge to allow for this conversation to progress.
Thank you so much, Natalia. We have 8 minutes left, so I'd like to open the floor to questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand up high, and then we will chase you with a microphone. Here, Johan.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Johan Krieger. I am Special Advisor to the Minister of Communications in South Africa, so a representative of government. I think my question, so firstly, I think the first comment is to thank you for having government representatives here. I was just telling Michael last week, I was at Africa Tech where all the tech companies were there. And like Natalia has mentioned, they are very aggressive in their lobbying, and I'm quite often the victim of that lobbying. So having this kind of alternative or opposing view is really useful. So I think that's important for platforms to this to include government, because we do have obviously quite a bit of the decision-making power, or at least influence over decision makers. So thank you, and I think keep on going with that. I think is really important. And then I think my question is then maybe for Natalia around, in your investigation, have you found what the counter power needs to be against this invisible hand of big tech? And because I think with, often so I serve a politician, and a politician has very many interests, and it's not always just as easy as this is the right thing to do, because there's so many different constituencies. We have a coalition government, so there's very, very complex matters to consider. But oftentimes, because there's so much things happening, just the loudest argument wins out. So I'm just wondering what you've learned from that, and what the best way is to then influence influencers and the decision makers. Thank you.
Oh, and we have another one up here. Paula? Thanks.
Thank you. Natalia, I wanted to ask you two questions about investigation. One is, have you heard back from big tech at all? Was there a reaction to the pieces you have published? And the second one is like, you're focusing on big tech, but we know that there are media that are closer to them that would feel very comfortable being cozy with big tech. And at least in Brazil, there is a tradition that media does not talk about media. So do you see a distinction among players, like big players, digital natives, and when it comes to the relationship with big tech?
We have one more question back here.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much. My name is Gayatri. I teach at a university here, but I've also been an advocate for press freedom, freedom of expression, and democratized media for a long time. I have a question taking into account what Gina had said at the start, and also what the Indonesian minister had talked about in terms of moving ahead with copyright as part of protecting. I understand the challenges that the media is facing, but the media also, sort of builds and lives and thrives on content that others produce. So I suppose my question is, as we're thinking about all these new models, one, what is the commitment of the media in thinking about public interest, in thinking about information, that sort of provision for the public? How much is committed towards protecting that knowledge, right? That is coming from communities, that's coming from people who are sharing information without actually getting any compensation. Because multimedia today takes on multiple forms of content from the public. So it's not necessarily all processed by newsrooms. So that's one. Second, in the race to look for this copyright, how much are we then depriving communities, people who are vulnerable, and people who cannot subscribe from also accessing media content? So while we are fighting for ways to protect content, especially against the big techs, the big players, could there be a risk that in that whole process, we mentioned that influencers are important as part of bridging. They also rely on content, and then they produce content as well. So I'm just wondering if anyone is also considering the risks that it may have towards those people who rely on content but don't pay for it or cannot afford to pay for it. So I'm just trying to also, bring the conversation into how we are looking at communities at large, because I've also been an advocate of Creative Commons. For Creative Commons, we don't hear that conversation among media. Media have never been actually a proponent of Creative Commons, but that's very community-oriented and something that has been advocated as alternative ways of preserving knowledge. So just in terms of, how to sort of consider those issues. Thanks.
Great. If I can, I think given the time, perhaps we can mix answering the questions with also final thoughts from each of our panelists. I will say just recognition to your question, Gayatri, which is that that tension of free information and information made to everyone, available to everyone, no matter their geography or their resources, is the need for the math to work for the production of journalism and other types of content has been a theme since São Paulo, since the first conference we did earlier this year. And so very eager to hear from our panelists. But it is that tension and how to grapple with it, I think, is going to be a continuous area of work that we need to be committed to and be really held accountable on, because otherwise the community will split on that. So, Ian?
I thought Natalia was going to go first, and I was going to have 3 more minutes to think about my answer. I think if we do it right, these things should not actually be in tension with each other. I think part of the problem is that actually there are not very subtle and nuanced ways to enact control right now, which means you have these downstream impacts. You limit it for one person, you limit it for everyone. There's actually no real reason why it has to be that way, especially if we're not all bickering over the same existing and relatively small pool of data, if we can expand the frame of reference so that we're actually including more knowledge sources, we have data abundance rather than data scarcity, I think some of these dynamics, if not all, will go away. And then I also just wanted to say, I think one of the problems that I do see it's not just related to this, is we are becoming extremely reliant on a handful of companies who, as we say, can go away and their products can go away or suddenly be billable, etc. I would really like to see much more by way of model development, much more by way of app development. I don't see why the media can't play in that space too. I think the media has fantastic skills to offer in that space. And with AI, you can build more than ever before with less knowledge than ever before. That's one of the beautiful things about it. Actually, you don't need a degree in computer science to build a little app anymore. And we should be excited about that because I think it opens up the possibility of media being a builder as well as a content disseminator.
I guess I'll go next. Yeah, I think I pretty much echo the same sentiments. The opportunity that's now placed in our hands is that we don't need to be a big tech company to actually adapt to that new future. Whether we decide, like, as a content creator, whether the content should be free for all, or it's something that I want to monetize, or I want to have some incentive or return of value. And there's a lot of tools that we can now use. Like I myself, I'm not a developer, but this year with the use of AI, I've built many applications on my own. And now with your development teams being improved, right, their productivity is like greatly improved with all these tools out there. We can use this instead of like a we don't have to perceive it as a negative thing. That's what I'm trying to say. And that we can use it to our advantage to actually adapt, because you won't change the fact that people's expectations or the user behavior has been changing already. So yeah, just to create different types of access models, to create different types of maybe even data that you want to showcase to different, whether it's crawlers or whether it's to real humans, it's up to you to determine. And the kind of controls is no longer like rocket science for you to implement. It's really simple. It's a few steps. Yeah.
Natalia, for the last word.
Okay, I've got lots of questions though, but I'm going to be brief. Thank you for being here. I love to see the victims of big tech lobby. I love to talk to them because it's quite overwhelming, right? One of the things that I want to say is that people who are on the receiving end of the lobby, many of them, first of all, they're overwhelmed because it's so many people, and you know, each one of their companies, they have 3-4 associations, and they have 3-4 different people coming to talk to you. But also because there is a power imbalance, because especially lawmakers, congressmen, many of them depend on the technology. They depend on social media to get votes. And we have heard, we don't have somebody saying this on the record, but that they offer, you know, closeness, they offer, you know, maintenance, support. Anytime, the day of the night, this lobbyist told me, if a politician calls me, I'll answer them if they have any problem with their accounts. And some are also scared. Some are also saying, if I really confront them, am I going to be like, am I going to reach less people? So there is a dependency for votes. How can you counter it? What has worked is the people who disagree or the people who want regulation have to be there. They have to show up. They have to go on the door to door. They have to show up when the regulatory debates are happening. In Brazil, we founded an association of digital media. Ajor has a lobbyist who is a lovely person, a woman who is like a girl in the middle of all these old men, you know, of traditional media. And you know, she's really turned the debate quite a lot just by being there and by, you know, being this, you know, innovative presence in the Congress as well. Another thing is we have to have information, because one of the things is they create a lot of bullshit reports. And then they distribute these reports and they say, oh my God, this is going to damage innovation. You know, we are the innovation, like as if we are not innovating, like we are doing journalism in new formats with no money. Google and OpenAI are losing billions. Give me the billions. I'm going to innovate better than you. No, really, it's such an unfair. Anyway, so we have to create information. We have to do research, we have to have journalism, we have to have, you know, policy briefs, and they need to have the arguments. Because even if they are so overwhelmed, it's really hard for them. And then finally, public polls. Every poll, at least in Brazil, Latin America, show that people are in favor of regulating social media and big tech, specifically because it's damaging their kids. If you ask them, everybody who has kids is seeing what's doing to this new generation, and everybody's in favor of regulation. So do polls. There's not enough polls showing how people really are in favor of regulating big tech. Now to Paula's question, did big tech react? They did. They reacted very quietly because we are from the global south. And they're like, they don't care, they don't matter that much. But they were nervous because, you know, actually we had Lighthouse reports, so we had, you know, our friends from, you know, the colonial masters sending the questions over. So they would respond, and the way specifically Google responded was like, Google said, okay, can you not name the names of our executives? And we said, absolutely not. We're going to name the names. This is why we're doing this. Because the executives are doing the lobby, and they're, you know, going to their friends and their families, and they're saying, I'm a very successful executive. It needs to weigh on them. It needs, you know, they have to be exposed. This is what they're doing. They are stopping conversations from happening in different countries. And you know, knowing these people, they get, you know, more anxious. So they have to respond for what they're doing, you know, in the public sphere. And then finally, the big and small media. This is always a tension because it's a natural tension. Of course, you know, traditional media don't want big new players to be there. And the way that Google has approached it, I'm going to be very brief, but I understood what Google News Initiative was about. What Google News Initiative was about was actually to foment a new generation of players that would not have as much power, but would also be allied to Google. And they tried to foster it as much as possible. It wasn't very possible because journalism is not a very profitable business. It's very hard to maintain, and then even Google, you know, after a time, gave up. But then, because they were very close to this new generation, and I mean myself, they started trying to have us, you know, compete against the big media in terms of regulation. So they were saying, all regulation will only benefit the big guys, and you guys will be left out. What happened in many countries, and what's happening now in Brazil as well, is that the small guys now are much, like we've forged alliance with the big media. I do not see in Brazil that some big media are too close to Google. They're playing like they have some small media, some local media, some big media. You know, they're just playing with whatever they get. What I see is when there is a coalition, when there is an association, when there is more than 1, 2, 3 talking, they tend to favor the national priorities, because this is not about, you know, an innovative player. This is about sovereignty. This is about all the money from Brazil is going to the United States of America. So, you know, I prefer that it goes to global. I prefer that it goes to our local oligopolistic power. Anyway, sorry. I hope I answered.
Well, on that note, I think we will conclude this panel. Thank you all. Can we give a round of applause to our amazing panelists? Thank you so much.